Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, sitting down to talk about our favorite, Starfield. Now, today's conversation will admittedly get pretty critical as we poke the big Bethesda bear and highlight some growing concerns. And these concerns, funny enough, are born out of passion from the fans, but also restlessness. You see, Bethesda suffers from what I call a rare issue across game companies that I've only really seen CD Projekt Red struggle with. In the case of Bethesda, when they show gameplay, people are happy, cheery, and satiated. But soon after, as the months go by and fans want to know more, and they especially want to see more, those bits of speculation, when the gameplay first drops, start to become true, tangible fears. And today we are going to be talking a lot about frame rate when it comes to Starfield. Now, this conversation is based in two key areas. The first being the Lex Friedman podcast with Todd Howard, so we can hear from the horse's mouth how Todd feels about frame rate in video games. Where we're also going to focus is going to be the latest statement from Microsoft when it comes to $70 games for first-party studios, a part of Xbox. And that is going to, of course, all tie together as I offer some of my thoughts. But ladies and gentlemen, if you are new here and you are into the latest Bethesda news, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing. With that, I want you to hear it straight from Todd Howard first before I give any of my thoughts, so you can come to your own conclusion, your own thoughts as I sift through my own. So here's this clip of Todd Howard on the Lex Friedman show where you can hear him talk about frame rate and fidelity in his video games.
Usually we will start with let the player have as much agency and do as many things as they can as possible. And we will sacrifice some graphic fidelity for that, some speed for that. You know, we could make a game that, traditionally our games are, we okay with 30 frames a second as long as it looks really good and the simulation's running and all of those things. So we'll sacrifice some of that fidelity for the player experience in the kind of things that I do.
I don't want to get into the cadence of his sentence, how he kind of stopped himself and picked himself back up like he was about to say something maybe he shouldn't have. I really want to focus on exactly what was said here. And that's that Todd Howard seems okay dropping frames or dropping fidelity to achieve the true creative freedom that he believes his games bring. Now, we'll get into that a little bit more in a moment, but we need to tie it into where the fan base has started to build up a little bit of their fears. When you look at Starfield's gameplay right now, which looks beautiful visually, it is locked at 30 FPS, at least on YouTube. Now, there's a bit of a caveat to this as a content creator that I'll make you aware of, which is you can capture your gameplay in different frame rates. You can also capture a game in 60 FPS and render it out in 30 FPS. Most companies are smart enough to know to render it out in the highest frame rate possible. But when you look at Starfield, that gameplay is not in 30 FPS. You can also see other potential concessions, also parts of the game that may not just be implemented yet, but you would imagine at this stage they are, such as no gore, no blood, no dismemberment, and the latter part just may not be in the game at all. But no blood was a pretty surprising revelation for a team that's made only M-rated games for a pretty long time. Point being, though, is it felt like something was missing in that regard, and as you start to see the speculation build up, you wonder if, based off what Todd said and the lack of blood, that concessions are being made to achieve the creative freedom that Starfield has, but that it may be locked at 30 FPS. You see, this conversation is more relevant than it's ever been before. The reason for that is because of two games that dropped this year, funny enough, side by side pretty much. Those games being Gotham Knights and A Plague Tale Requiem, both games that we reviewed here on this channel. Now, I didn't have the opportunity to get into the frame rate conversation when it came to A Plague Tale Requiem because I played it on PC where it was smooth as butter, and I enjoyed it that way. However, for a lot of people, they were displeased that on the Series X, it was around the 40 FPS mark, whereas on PS5, it was locked at 30. The same thing goes for Gotham Knights, which barely was keeping 30 and oftentimes was in the mid-20s. And it was a big talking point in the industry for weeks on end because there was a lot of concern that we were going backwards now as companies tried to move things forward, technologically speaking, such as what we saw with A Plague Tale Requiem and less so with Gotham Knights, where games really trying to push their fidelity would sacrifice those frames. Would Starfield, in this case, based off what Todd had said and what we have now seen, end up in the same boat? And this is something that, speculation here, we should consider. Let's be honest, Starfield does look a lot better than any Bethesda Game Studios game that's been produced in the past. And when I say looks better, I'm talking very literally. Like when you look at the assets in-game, it looks visually much better than anything that's come out of Bethesda Game Studios. And that makes sense, and it's exactly what Todd Howard said. Their games are not graphically beautiful. They're beautiful in their own way, I'd say on an artistic front, with draw distance, with setting up great vistas, and so on and so forth. There's a beauty in that. But when we're talking about raw fidelity, if you were to put, say, Fallout 4 side by side with something like a Plague Tale Requiem, it's night and day, right? You can tell where the focus of the developer went. And Bethesda Game Studios chooses not to focus on that stuff to achieve what Todd said was player freedom. But I personally am of the mindset that if you are going to be a console seller, if you are going to be the lead platform developer, or at least one of them, you should be able to support your game on both sides of the spectrum, being frame rate as well as fidelity. One thing Todd also said in this interview was that he likes working on the Xbox because he likes to focus on one thing. And it wouldn't surprise me at all, based off what I know about Todd as a developer, as you all do, if he just honed in on one core experience with very little visual options like we've become accustomed to today with your performance mode and your fidelity mode. I think there is a reasonable, tangible concern there. Even if you remove the gameplay out of the equation, which could have just been rendered at a lower frame rate or even captured at a lower frame rate, I do think that would have been short-sighted of Xbox and Bethesda to not have the 60 FPS performance mode available to see. But point being is they wanted to make the biggest splash possible with this game and impress everyone with its first look. Even if you were to remove that gameplay, which is at 30 FPS, you still have a developer who's leading the entire project saying that he's willing to sacrifice fidelity or frames to achieve his overall vision. Now, I sit in a very strange camp that I know is not representative of the entire industry. I can deal with 30 FPS. I don't think it's the end of the world. I think what's more frustrating is dropping frames, and I feel like we're heading towards a point now in our industry where you're going to see more 45 FPS games because eventually the gap closes there and you can at least feel it's running smoother, and some people are willing to make that concession. I just worry that as a platform leader, Starfield is going to look really weird if it doesn't have those options available as a game that is going to pretty much be used to market the Xbox Series X as a whole. Have they gone all in on fidelity so that they could say, look how powerful our box is, and market it to other developers as well as, of course, fans? Many people in the games industry may care, but on the outside, fidelity speaks first, and many people don't even know the difference of frame rate until they experience it. And when they experience it, they don't really know exactly what's going on and why it is smoother. Not that it doesn't matter ultimately, but it's something, again, worth considering. So that's the Todd Howard segment of it all. Based off what he said and what we've seen, there is the possibility that this game could be running at a lower frame rate. And I think it's a realistic possibility that we should just take a moment to process, absorb, and think about what that reality looks like. And I'm going to do that here and now. Let's move forward in our conversation and talk about what Xbox had to say about moving their prices up to $70 a pop for Starfield, Redfall, and Forza Motorsport. The exact quote is, "This price reflects the content, scale, and technical complexity of these titles," a spokesperson at Microsoft told IGN. "As with all games developed by our teams at Xbox, they will be available with Game Pass the same day they launch." I think if you were to look at any recent game and the backlash it received for just, I would say, missing the mark a little bit in some regards and majorly in other areas, look no further than the recently released Callisto Protocol. Big talking point for this game that I saw consistently, and this is anecdotal, mind you, but I continue to see, was the price tag. And that fortified my belief that it may just be to some folks only $10, but those $10 bring your game under a bigger microscope than it's ever been before, because we're charging the most we ever have for video games. That's not, again, accounting for other territories across the globe where they charge a lot more money for video games. But point being is there are people who are going to be spending more, so they're going to be more critical of these games. And it may be an awkward look if you were to drop Starfield and say, hey, 30 FPS only, but it looks really good, and say, but you're going to give us $70 now. It becomes a whole different conversation. And when you start to look at the Callisto Protocol, which I think the industry made out to be an absolute tragedy, when I think it was just a game that was only okay personally, which that's fine. But because it was 70, a lot of people were going hard on this game. And I think the same thing will happen exponentially so to Xbox and Bethesda if they are to launch a platform leading exclusive and say, hey, sorry everybody, but it's 30 FPS only. You see, when you're asking for more in the terms of Xbox, you do have Game Pass to lean into a little bit. But that is where the conversation does get muddy, and potentially we're creating excuses for big companies that owe us a little bit more. What I mean by that is if we are to constantly lean on Game Pass and give Xbox and give Bethesda the long rope, they'll use it to wrap it around us and choke us out for more prices. And that is something that we don't want to walk into. Again, a lot of this is just a tale of being cautionary when it comes to how companies operate right now. There's a reason why Xbox dropped this news this week. They are calculating this. Why do I say they're calculated? Let's roll back the clock a little bit. Some of y'all, when I post Xbox news updates, say, well, what's the point of this? This isn't a big deal. But here's an example of one issue that I did talk about where Phil did mention, hey, we're going to consider raising the prices of consoles, Game Pass, games in general. It can't last forever is what he said, right? And a lot of folks are like, that's not news. But it's relevant because what happens now is he was planting the seeds for the news to come, so people are ready and braced for it. And that reality, that acceptance of it is a part of the grieving process. And when you can get to that stage a little bit quicker, the blowback is lessened. And are they doing it now for one of two reasons? One, get it out of the way, let people accept this reality. So maybe at something as soon as the Game Awards, we get another look at Starfield or Redfall or Forza Motorsport and go, aha, excellent. This is really exciting. I can't wait to buy this game. Or is it get it out of the way now so people can accept it, forget about it. Everyone goes away for their holiday vacation. We come back. It's 2023. It's lit. We got all our games here. This is the year of Xbox. The hype is at the highest it's ever been as they announce game after game after game coming to the platform exclusively. I think either reality could be one that occurs here. But the point being is Xbox deliberately announced this news this week for a reason, right? They don't just decide to throw themselves under the bus unless they have plans in place, at least based off my knowledge and my studies of them as a company and the way they operate. This is no just, let's drop this news today. While it may be to many of you who consume the content, whatever, this is something that is amounting to something much more. Whether it be, again, seeing more Starfield, Redfall, or Forza, or it being getting it out of the way so then we can digest, accept, and of course let the Xbox propaganda run free, which is, well, Game Pass. That is something that could be occurring here as well. But back to square one, the core of this conversation is that it looks more and more to me like there is a realistic possibility that Starfield could be 30 FPS. Do I think it will end up being that way? I think if, logically speaking, you are a platform leader and you are a first-party studio, more importantly, then you probably should be creating a game that accompanies all options, all accessibility, all frame rates, all visual preferences, all that stuff should be covered because you are leading the platform and you are designed to look a level above your traditional third-party game, quite frankly. And I feel like when you miss that, and you make a very finely tuned experience, that has more independent vibes to me personally. But on the other end of the spectrum, it could just be speculation getting a little bit out of control based off what Todd said in his interview and based off what we saw. But this is what happens when these companies disappear for a while. It's something I talked a bit about earlier on, which is that when you go away and you don't show anything for a while, but we only hear you speaking, we start to get these ideas, these visions in our head because we don't have anything to associate with what you're talking about. You're just talking. And that leaves a lot of rooms, unfortunately, for assumptions. And that, unfortunately for Bethesda, CD Projekt Red, and many other game companies, in fact, leaves a lot of room for assumptions to be made and people to draw their own conclusions before a company is ready to respond. And so they just got to be careful of that, of course, but I wanted to make sure I offered my thoughts on the matter as we approach the Game Awards and see exactly what's going to happen here. Do I expect Starfield to be here? You know, quite frankly, I think it's a 50-50 coin toss, but I'm leaning toward no, because I feel like Xbox is probably waiting until the start of 2023 to really just kick it off and maybe announce a bunch of new things for their games. I feel like based off the way they announced a delay together for Starfield and Redfall, they might want to do the same when they both have a date, if they could. I feel like that would be a bit more monumental than just another trailer at the Game Awards, which is historically swamped. But on the other side, Xbox historically has a presence there. I just would be very surprised to see, for the first time since I believe Skyrim, Bethesda Game Studio showing up there. But of course, I'd be happy to be wrong. Otherwise, that's just my thoughts on the conversation surrounding Starfield, its frame rate, and some growing concerns with the game. I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts in the comments down below, so please do fire away. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below, and a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the hell out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.